There's a version of hurt that doesn't make noise. It doesn't raise its voice, doesn't demand an explanation, doesn't push back in the moment, goes somewhere else, inside, quiet. And the person wearing it becomes, for a while, a version of themselves that's present in body and absent everywhere else. The people around them notice something has changed. The energy is different. The warmth that's usually there isn't. But when they ask what's wrong, they get nothing. I'm fine. Or just silence. Or a one-word answer that communicates, without saying it directly, that the conversation is over. And from the outside, this reads as coldness, as punishment, as someone shutting down, shutting out, making a point through withdrawal. But here's what's curious. For a lot of people who go silent when they're hurt, the silence isn't about the other person at all. It's about what's happening inside them. And what's happening inside them in that moment is something that language simply cannot get ahead of. Researcher John Gottman at the University of Washington spent decades studying couples in conflict, and one of his most significant findings was a phenomenon he called flooding, a state of physiological overwhelm in which the nervous system becomes so activated that the capacity for rational communication breaks down. Heart rate spikes. Cortisol floods the system. The parts of the brain responsible for nuanced language, perspective-taking, and emotional regulation go offline. Not metaphorically, but in a measurable, documented way. What's left is reactive, defensive, or, for some people, completely silent. Flooding isn't a personality trait. It's a physiological event. And some people are significantly more susceptible to it than others. Particularly those who have a history of environments where emotional intensity was chronic, where the nervous system was trained to treat interpersonal conflict as a high-stakes situation. For those people, being hurt doesn't just feel painful. It triggers a system that was built to survive. And survival in that moment looks like going quiet. At some point in your life. Probably earlier than you can clearly remember. You learned that needing things was risky. Not because someone told you that. But because the room changed when you did. So you stopped needing things out loud. You became the capable one. The one who holds it together. I spent a long time tracing where this comes from. Everything I found is linked in the description. And in the first pinned comment. Because the silence doesn't start with flooding. Starts much earlier than that. In the specific history of what happened over time, when this person tried to express that they were hurt. John Bowlby's attachment research established something that developmental psychologists have built on for decades. When a child's expressions of distress are met consistently with dismissal, escalation, or silence, when "that hurt me" produces "you're too sensitive," or "stop being dramatic," or simply nothing, the child learns through repetition to suppress the signal. Not the feeling. A signal. The hurt doesn't go away. Just stops looking for a door. And the child who learned that expressing hurt was useless, or made things worse, becomes the adult who, in the moment of real pain, cannot find the words. Not because they're not articulate. Not because they don't want to communicate. But because the pathway between feeling hurt and expressing it was closed a long time ago, in a room where opening it produced the wrong result. The silence, then, isn't coldness. It's a learned response to a situation that the nervous system has categorized as high risk. Don't speak. Don't expose the wound. Wait until it's safe, and then figure out if it ever will be. And here's what that silence is actually doing from the inside. It's protective. It creates distance from a situation that feels threatening before the person has the resources, emotional, cognitive, physiological, to navigate it. When flooding happens, when the system goes into overwhelm, the worst thing a person can do is try to speak through it. They know this, even without being able to articulate it. The silence is the one thing that might prevent the conversation from becoming something they can't take back. But it's also, and this is the part that almost never gets understood, a form of communication. The most honest one available in the moment. The silence says, "Something happened. I'm not okay. I don't have words for it yet. And if I try to find them right now, what comes out won't be the real thing. So I'm going here instead. Not away from you. Just away from the situation, until I can return to it and say something true." The problem is that's not what it reads as. To the person on the receiving end of the silence, it reads as withdrawal. as punishment, as the emotional equivalent of a door being closed in their face. And that reading, even when it's wrong, produces a response that often makes returning even harder. They push. They escalate. They interpret the silence as indifference and react to indifference. And the person who went silent, watching that escalation, goes quieter. Because now there's more to navigate than there was before, and they had even less to begin with. And the distance between them grows. Not because either person wanted it to, but because the language they each needed to cross it wasn't available at the same time. But here's what almost no one understands about people who go silent when they're hurt. The silence is not indifference. It is the opposite of indifference. The people who feel the least are the ones who keep talking, who can stay verbal because the emotional volume isn't high enough to overwhelm the system. The people who go silent are often the ones who feel the most. So much that the feeling exceeds the channel. So much that the only honest response is to stop, because continuing would mean producing something that isn't true to what's actually happening inside. And the tragedy, and this is specific and real and worth sitting with, is that the very thing that signals how much they care, the going quiet, the retreat, the disappearing into themselves, reads to everyone else as not caring at all. The person who is most hurt becomes invisible in their hurt. And the people around them, unable to read the signal, interpret the absence as absence of feeling, when it is, more often than not, the fullest feeling in the room. And there's a particular form of grief that lives inside this pattern. Not grief for the relationship, though sometimes that too, but grief for the version of themselves that existed before the silence became the default. Before the channel between feeling hurt and saying so was rerouted through years of learning that the reroute was safer. That version, the one who could reach for someone when something hurt, who could say, that landed wrong in the moment rather than days later or never, was not lost all at once. It went quietly, in small moments of exposure that produced the wrong result. In the times they tried to say what they felt and the room shifted in the way they'd learned to fear. In the times they stayed silent and nothing bad happened, and the silence got confirmed as the smarter move. Until the silence was no longer a choice made in the moment. It was the shape of how they moved through pain entirely. What changes this isn't a decision to speak more. It's a discovered safety. A relationship or a moment where expressing the hurt produces something different from what the history predicted. Something warm or steady, or simply present in a way that doesn't make the wound worse. That discovery doesn't erase the history, but it writes something new into it. A different kind of evidence. One the nervous system can actually use. But there's something worth understanding about that discovery, and about how rarely it happens by accident. Because for the person who goes silent when hurt, the nervous system's prediction that speaking won't lead anywhere safe doesn't just come from the original environment. It's been maintained, in most cases, by everything that happened after. Every time the silence was interpreted as indifference. Every time the other person escalated in response to the withdrawal. Every time the conversation that could have bridged the distance instead made it wider, confirming that the silence was, in fact, the least costly option available. John Gottman's research on flooding offers something useful here. The physiological recovery from an emotionally overwhelming state takes, on average, around 20 minutes for most people. 20 minutes before the system that went offline can come back online. 20 minutes before the rational mind, the part capable of nuanced language, of perspective-taking, of saying something true and not just reactive, can re-enter the room. What this means practically is that the silence isn't the enemy of the conversation. It's often its precondition. The person who goes quiet isn't ending the exchange. They're preserving the possibility of having it under conditions where it might actually work. And the most important thing the people around them could understand, and that the person themselves often hasn't been able to articulate, is that the silence is not permanent, has a shape, has a duration, and what it needs from the other side is not more pressure. It needs to be given room to end on its own terms. You've probably watched a lot of videos like this, and most of them almost described you but not quite. Something was always slightly off. The language wasn't right. The person they were describing wasn't quite you. If this one felt different, I think what I've linked below will feel different too. Description and first pinned comment. Now I want to speak to you directly. Think about the last time you went silent when you were hurt. Not intentionally, not as a strategy. Just the quiet that arrived before you had a chance to choose it. What were you actually feeling in that moment? Not hurt. That's the category. What was the specific texture of it? Was it betrayal? Was it grief? Was it the particular ache of being misunderstood by someone whose understanding mattered? Was it something older than the situation itself? Something the moment touched that had been waiting there for a long time? And then, what did you imagine would happen if you said that out loud? Not in theory. Specifically, if you had found the words in that moment and you had said them, what did some part of you expect would follow? Because for a lot of people who go silent, the answer to that second question is the answer to everything. The expectation, formed long ago, confirmed enough times to become a prediction, that expressing this will change something in the room, that it will cost something, that the wound, brought into the open, will become more vulnerable, not less. And that expectation isn't paranoia. It was built from evidence. But here's what might also be true. The people in your life right now may not be the room where that evidence was gathered. They may be capable of receiving what the original room couldn't. And the only way to find out is to test something the silence was designed to prevent. You don't have to find all the words at once. Sometimes the beginning of it is just, something happened and I don't have language for it yet, but I need you to know I'm not okay. That's not the full conversation. But it's a signal that doesn't require the silence to carry the whole weight. And it gives the people who love you a way in, instead of leaving them outside a door that, from their side, looks like it might be locked forever. If this video found you today, leave a comment. Tell me what the silence usually carries that you can't say out loud. I read everything. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because what comes next goes directly into the pattern underneath this one. What forms when someone spends years communicating through silence instead of words, and what eventually makes the words possible.